quickly are illustrated by the example of, for example, the hospital patient allergy information. When they store the information in a database, the doctor should be able to trust that information is correct and current. I mean, is updated. So now suppose that an employee, for example, a nurse, who is authorized to view and update the information, right? Uh, if he or she falsifies the data to cause harm to the hospital, so the database need to be restored to a trusted base quickly, and it should be possible to trace the error back to the person responsible. The patient allergy information is an example of the, for example, the asset with the high requirements for integrity. Okay, so inaccurate information could result in a serious harm or even death, all right, to a patient and expose the hospital to massive liability. That is very important. Example of the moderate one, level of that one is a website that offers a forum to register user to discuss some specific topic, for example. Either a registered user or a hacker, for example, could falsify some entries, right, or deface the website. So if the forum exists only for the enjoyment, no problem. Okay, that should not be a big issue, right? So the webmaster may experience some data, financial, and time loss. Example of low integrity here, we can say the requirement is an anonymous online pool, for example. Okay, so many websites, such as news organizations, they offer these kind of polls to their user with a very few safeguard. However, the inaccuracy and unscientific nature of such polls are well understood by the people. They know already that is not really with the high integrity. Of course, the people know already. If you look at the availability example, the more critical a component or service, the higher is the level of availability required. So you just consider a system that provides the authentication services for critical system, application, and devices. Interruption of that kind of system or services can be considered as a high availability issue, right? Uh, Example of an asset that typically would be rated as having a moderate availability requirements is a public website for a university, for example, that we consider as a moderate availability. Such a website is not a critical component of the university information system, but its unavailability will cause some embarrassment to the university, of course. So that one we classify it as a moderate availability. An online telephone directory lookup application, we can say as an example of the low availability requirement. Although the temporary rules of the application uh, may be an annoyance, that or other ways to access the information. There are, the other ways, such as a hard copy of directory, or you can have an operator to give some information like that. So that one we consider as a low availability. So here in this example, we discuss about the confidentiality, integrity, availability examples for the high, moderate, and low, right? So the computer and network security is both fascinating and complex. So some of the reasons are, or maybe I can say the challenges. The security is not as simple as it might first appear to the novice. Okay. So if someone is new, maybe thought, okay, the security is very simple and straightforward. No. Okay. The requirement seems to be straightforward indeed, but most of the major requirements for security services can be given self-explanatory, right? So one-word labels, for example, confidentiality, authentication, non-repudiation, and integrity, for example. But the mechanism used to meet those requirements can be quite complex. When we simply say, okay, I can design a system with a high confidentiality, but once it's come to the implementation, so you can see the mechanism will be quite complex, and understanding them may involve rather subtle reasoning, right? The second one, in developing a particular security mechanism or algorithm, one must always consider potential attack on those security features. In many cases, successful attacks are designed by looking at the problem in a completely different way. Therefore, the exploiting an unexpected weakness in the mechanism is required. Okay. So number three is because of the point two, the second point, the procedure used to provide the particular services are often counter. So typically a security mechanism is complex and it is not obvious from the statement of a particular requirement that such elaborate the measures are needed. So it's only when the various aspects of the threat are considered, the elaborate security mechanism makes sense. Okay. So if we look at number four, having designed the various security mechanisms, it is necessary to decide where to use them. This is true both in terms of the physical placement, right? For example, at what point in a network are certain security mechanism needed, and in a logical sense as well. For example, at what layer or layers of an architecture, such as we have seen before, the TCP/IP, should mechanism be placed, for example. So the next one is a security mechanism typically involve more than a particular algorithm, okay, or protocol. They also require that participants be in a possession of some secret information. For example, an encryption key, which raises question about the creation, distribution, and protection of that secret key. That is very important, all right? There also may be a reliance on communication protocols whose behavior may complicate the task, right? For example, if the proper functioning of the security mechanism require setting time limits on the transit time of a message, for example, from sender to receiver, then any protocol or network that introduce a variable or unpredictable delay may render such time limits meaningless. For example, if of course, when we implement, you should keep in your mind when you implement any kind of security mechanism, you are increasing the delay by default. I can say it like that. All right. So the computer and network security is essentially a battle of wits between a perpetrator and who tries to find the holes and the designer or administrator who tries to close them. The great advantage that the attacker has is that he or she need only you can find a single weakness, right? While the designer must find and eliminate all weaknesses to achieve the perfect security. Okay, but for the attacker, if they can find a single weakness, then they can attack the system. Okay. There is a natural tendency on the part of user and system managers, right, to perceive the little benefit from security investment until a security failure occurs. Right. So the security requires the regular, in fact, even constant monitoring, and this is difficult in today's short term, all right, with this kind of environment. So that also need to be considered. The security is still too often an afterthought, right, to be incorporated into a system after the design is complete rather than being an integral part of the design process. That also need to be considered. And we should know that many users view strong security as an impediment to efficient and user-friendly operation of an information system or use of information, right? So the difficulties just enumerated will be, encountered in numerous ways as we examine the, various security threats and mechanisms throughout this work. that we will see later. Okay, so let's look at the OSI. I think most of you are familiar with this kind of architecture. We call it the OSI security architecture. Maybe previously you have studied about the OSI layers. Here we talk about the OSI security architecture. Okay. Here we have the kind of security attack, security mechanism, and security services. Okay. So to access effectively the security needs for an organization or to evaluate it, okay, the manager responsible for the computer and computer security, they need to define some of the requirements for security and characterizing the approaches to satisfying the requirement. Uh, Without knowing this kind of security architecture will be very difficult. Okay. So the security attack, any action that compromises the security of information owned by an organization. Mechanism is a process that is designed to detect, prevent, or recover from a security attack. And the security service is a processing or communication service that enhances the security of the data processing system and the information transfers of an organization, and also intended to counter security attack, and they make use of one or more security mechanism to provide the services. Okay, so let's look at the table 1. This is a threats and attack. uh, uh, you can see what is the meaning of the threat. It's a potential for violation of security. An attack is an assault on system security that drives from an intelligent threat, right? From now onward, we will discuss about this kind of terms. We will see the glossary and so on and so forth more and more. And once we complete this subject, I can say all of the slides, then you might come back and look at the some of the terms that we have used during these uh, lectures. So a useful means of classifying the security attacks, they use both in X800 and RFC 4949. RFC means requested for comment. So it's kind of the notes and information. So if you search on the internet, you can see a lot of RFC available. So even you can comment, or even you can come up with your own RFCs. So is in terms of passive attack and active attack. That is a very important two terms. The passive attack attempts to learn or make use of information from the system, but does not affect the system resources. Okay, that we call it the passive. So it's very difficult to find out the passive attack. All right, we don't know. Maybe someone is hearing to our conversation or not. That is very difficult. But the active attack attempts to alter the system resources or affect their operations. So the passive attack, as you can see in figure 1.2a, are in the nature of eavesdropping, is just listening, or monitoring of transmissions. On the other hand, the active attack involves some modification of the data. Okay, if there are some modification to the data, we call it the active attack. If just eavesdropping or listening or monitoring the transmission, we call it the passive attack. So the goal of the opponent is to obtain the information that is being transmitted for the passive attack. Okay, two type of passive attack are the release of message and traffic analysis. Okay, so the release of message content is easily understood. A telephone conversation, an electronic mail message, a transfer file may contain the sensitive or confidential information. So we would like to prevent an attacker, or we call it the opponent, from learning the content of this transmission. The second type of the passive attack is traffic analysis. Okay, suppose that we had a way of masking the contents of message or other information traffic, so that the attacker or opponents, even if they capture the message, They could not extract the information from the message. Okay. So the common techniques for masking the content is encryption. So later we will see, okay, by using the encryption, even if we encrypt our data, even the eavesdropping or attacker or opponent try to capture our information, they cannot understand it. That is very important. So if we had encryption protection in place, attacker might still be able to observe the pattern of these messages. All right, the opponent or attacker could determine the location and identity of communication host and could observe the frequency and length of the message being exchanged. So this information might be useful in guessing the nature of the communication that was taking place. Maybe they can understand. All right. So the passive attack are very difficult to detect. That is very bad because they do not involve any alternation or modification. So typically the message traffic is sent and received in an apparently normal